Using data to inform program improvement, the Bloomington Schools and Minnesota Reading Corps. We have with us today Dr. David Parker, Research Director of Serve Minnesota, and Dr. David Heistad, Executive Director of the Research, Evaluation, and Assessment for the Bloomington Public Schools.
So I started the last presentation this way as well. I think one of us did need that introduction. This is my first time here at this gathering. Dave Heistad, it's an honor to be presenting with Dave Heistad, who I know is kind of a mainstay around here. As my introduction said, I'm Research Director for Serve Minnesota. That's the organization that operates both the Reading Corps and the Math Corps. I'm going to be talking about the Reading Corps. So I wanted to start by just a quick show of hands in the room, those of you who have heard of the Reading Corps. Okay. And then those of you who have Reading Corps that you know of in your schools. Okay, great. It's just nice to see. The program has gone statewide, as we'll show. For those of you who are more familiar, there might be some familiar information that you already know, but this is a chance for us to share with all of you three main things. The first one is we're going to talk about the pre-kindergarten branch of the Reading Corps program. And then once we've done that, want to be able to share some outcomes from a rigorous and external evaluation that's really about how effective is it with the kids, getting towards that bottom line, how does Reading Corps affect student outcomes? And then lastly, some thinking that we're engaged in to extend some of that impact in the pre-K upward in K&1. So that's what I'll be talking about, and then I'll hand it over to Dave. Here is where Reading Corps sees itself. We do talk about how we are a part of the helping students learn to read, the familiar phrase, learn to read so you can read to learn. To be clear, though, we don't consider ourselves the only piece of that puzzle. We know that we're supporting schools. It's an AmeriCorps program that we're running here, so we're making available a resource and then training it and making it highly skilled to help schools do what they would do if they could get another resource. So that's really what we're doing. We see ourselves as partnering with the schools. And there are two branches to the Reading Corps program in general. I'm going to talk about the pre-K branch, and that's why that's bolded. In the pre-K setting, those tutors that we're talking about are trained, and in some cases teachers are trained as well, to supplement the whole literacy environment that's going on in a pre-K classroom. So if you were to walk into a pre-K classroom in the morning at student arrival time, you would see a tutor taking advantage of even that arrival time to lead students in an important literacy activity. You would see them marching the kids, in line towards lockers or cubbies, and they would be doing an alliteration activity, a very intentional rhyming activity, or working through a vocabulary word. Really, in pre-K, every minute is instructional time, and perhaps you could say that beyond pre-K. But that's what they're doing. They're also a trained resource. We adopt a response to intervention, multi-tiered system of support model. So those tutors also serve as the function for a resource for doing Tier 2 and Tier 3, which means for students, we have data as an important part of the program. For students who might need additional support, the tutor runs small group or one-on-one, we call interventions, to help select students improve their skills. And then lastly, there's a family engagement component. So we as part of the Reading Corps operations, the tutor runs some programming for the students to be able to take home materials and do some specific activities to help families get some experience with the types of things that are going on in the Reading Corps classrooms. So you'll have to forgive a little bit of marketing at the top of the title. We borrowed this from the Reading Corps marketing. There's a point to it. The point of this slide is that this year we're poised to serve over 30,000 students. We've run around training 1,400 tutors just in this state, and over 800 schools and close to 300 school districts. And so that growth is the way I think of this growth is it's really about schools and districts recognizing if they can get a good resource that's trained to support them with people power, that's really the essence of AmeriCorps, there's some value in that. We're not supplanting what the school is doing, we're really supporting what the school is doing. So that's what we've been up to over the last few years. Then this is what we kind of consider as our logic model. You can see in the very middle of it, we have a tutor working with a kid. And we know that's where the growth happens. It's two people, in this case a child and an adult, engaged in very specific activities to help the student learn. And what's going on in that circle, really three things, and that's what's on the bottom, foundational things. So one core component of what the tutor does is they help with the collection of data for data-driven decision-making. So as I mentioned, we're a response to intervention model, so our tutors are collecting data for screening, progress monitoring purposes. So that's part of what Reading Corps provides the school. And they help with that. They also, even the activities that I mentioned, when students arrive, or also in those small group and in one-on-one settings, they're implementing evidence-based interventions. One point I think that's worth noting here is that we recognize that the tutors aren't licensed professional teachers. So what we do is we acknowledge that, and we try to help them to do very specific scripted things. So the tutors get a lot of intensive training and have some pretty specific guidelines on how they implement these things, including the evidence-based interventions. But then that's actually a part of the third thing, the implementation fidelity, and that's really speaking to coaching. So we heard about a good coaching model going on in St. Louis Park, and we have a coaching model as well. It's where we have a school staff member who supports that tutor, and then we have an outside coach as well support them. And a quick comment given the audience about that internal coach, being the person from within the school. It's not an extensive and exhaustive time commitment. So it's not something that they have to be spending hours every day doing. But it is not also trivial. There's some very specific amounts of time that they need to allocate and things they need to do in that time. And it's really, that's what makes it a part of a model that can embed that tutor into the school culture. So that's a unique aspect of the program. So with that as the background, I want to get to that second main thing I wanted to talk about, which was the results of a recent study that was conducted of the pre-K program. To be clear, we weren't the ones that did it. It was conducted by the University of Chicago, the NORC research group there, and actually, incidentally, folks from this building. They're local contacts here at TIES. And the main purpose of this evaluation was really to conduct a rigorous, impartial, thorough investigation of, take out all other possible explanations, does Reading Corps actually help students improve their literacy skills? And so you'll see some methodological elements about making sure that's done and possible. Part of it is the number of students, and that was stratified, good representation across various types of schools. Another part of it was the experimental, quasi-experimental design with matching. So the types of schools participating in this, you could imagine a number of different things, from proportion of English learners being similar, with the only difference being the presence of Reading Corps in one school and not in the other. Head Start centers being the same, schedules, numbers of students in general. So they went on down a list of 9 variables and made sure that the only difference was really the presence of the Reading Corps. Then what they did is they measured outcomes 3 times during the year. An important note for that is they took into account any differences that might have been existing at the beginning. So we could take that into account as well, and looked at the outcomes for the kids in both types of settings, with Reading Corps and without, to see what the differences were in literacy outcomes. There were 5, and they're listed here, and they cover important literacy skills for pre-K students, including oral language, phonological awareness skills, and early alphabetics. And this is the main column, the average growth, treatment, which is Reading Corps, comparison, which is non-Reading Corps, difference. So across those different skills, you can see that Reading Corps students are showing more of whatever that is measuring. So they had 4 more vocabulary concepts or words out of picture naming. You can see that goes down the line. It really was making, in this case, a statistically significant, but also meaningful and profound impact on the students' literacy skills. And another way to measure that is with effect size. That's the far right column. That column can be interpreted using either qualitative descriptors. Usually these are considered moderate to large. effect sizes, which means it was a meaningful and profound impact. But also, it's possible to use educational benchmarks for those. Usually people in research and education get excited about it for a 0.2 there, and you can see that we're exceeding that kind of a benchmark. It's a benchmark you can use. So here's a sample depiction of those results. This is for the oral language and the vocabulary outcome measure, so the picture naming. And you can see that it succeeded in the two groups being similar in the fall. By winter, the program, or orange, which is reading core, is already showing improved outcomes. And then by the spring, those outcomes are a little bit more differentiated. And one of the things to note is this line with the dash reflects what was at the time kindergarten readiness outcomes. So you can see that the pre-K students at the reading core sites are on average meeting and exceeding that level of skill that we're hoping to have them so they're ready for kindergarten in the following year. And this trend was actually consistent across all of the 5 measures. I'm not going to show those for sake of time, but I did want to pause and just share this outcome, which is really about the achievement gap and what we can do to help students who need to make up the difference. What they did is they looked at, rather than just lumping all of the students together, they looked at subgroups of students. So the students who were speaking English as a second language versus the students who weren't. And looked to see if those outcomes were sustained. What they found in general was that they were, which is good, but they found some differences that were actually surprisingly positive. In other words, the students who made up the achievement gap, or who might have been considered more at risk through any one of the definitions of the achievement gap, were actually making greater gains than the students who weren't. So for example, you could imagine ESL students making greater, stronger gains than non-ESL students. All ships were rising, but the ones that were the lowest were rising the most, which was something we were not expecting, but obviously excited to see. So this is a summary slide, as things I've already mentioned. The results showed that we had that statistically significant impact, meaning we can say reading core was making that difference. And importantly, the students were reaching, on average, those year-end benchmarks. So the last piece before I transition over to Dave is that we've been taking some of those results, and even before that, we're working on thinking about how we can take what we know about helping oral language and extend that up, as I mentioned at the beginning. So this is about an intervention tool called the Repeated Read Aloud. And so we're engaged in some work in applying that in kindergarten and first grade right now. It would follow the logistics of the K-3 program, which delivers interventions in 20-minute time slots. But it would make available this helpful intervention tool for students who need additional support in oral language. And a couple of the neat features there is that we're including explicit and implicit practices. So very systematic introductions to words using child-friendly definitions. And also the opportunity for kids to interact with each other and adults to talk about, when was the last time you were on a boat or you saw a boat in a picture. That's what elicits oral language from students. And then we're focusing all that work on the 4,000 to 5,000 words that make up 90% of the words that kids really should have by middle to late elementary. So I'll transition over to Dave. One of the things that is embedded into all the things that we do, both is the use of data, both for the purposes of helping students and making decisions about students, but also evaluating broader sets of outcomes. And Dave will say a little bit more about that.
Hi, I'm Dave Heisted from Bloomington Schools. I've been there 3 years now. It's been a great period of time working with a fantastic school board. I have to mention Nellie Corman and Tom Bennett are here. This district has a super commitment to early childhood. We have a very robust pre-K program within the district that's been demonstrated to narrow the achievement gaps. And we do direct assessment right as children enter kindergarten. One of the things I want to talk about is the value of direct assessment, not only for program evaluation, but for getting teachers information about strengths and weaknesses right as students start. And my collaboration through Minneapolis and through the PICA Head Start program in Minneapolis and Reading Corps goes back 10 or 11 years. And with the first study we did at Head Start, we had volunteer AmeriCorps students trained in preschool, pre-K literacy, be instructors within the Head Start, and we matched those students that were in those classrooms with kids that weren't in Head Start, and we got very significant differences. The kind of differences David is talking about here, 0.5 effect size, it's like taking students from the 50th percentile to the 79th percentile. Each student on average. So these are huge effects. And so we were really glad to see that, and Head Start has really emphasized literacy ever since. One of the things that we did in Minneapolis was to create a direct assessment we called the BKA that included pre-reading skills like alliteration, rhyming, knowing your letters, knowing the sounds of letters, but also vocabulary, picture vocabulary was in there, and a book where teachers would read the book to students and ask questions. And we found that that assessment predicted really well third grade proficiency in reading. And so we set up benchmarks in Minneapolis. When I came to Bloomington, they had a similar assessment, and I asked the question, I wonder if we combine those two assessments together, if we get even more predictive power for first grade reading. So that's what we did, and I'm calling it the BKA now. It's the BKA plus the Bloomington EKA, and it really includes numeracy and literacy type items. In numeracy, we had knowing your colors and knowing shapes. Well, kids now with good preschool programs all know their colors and their shapes, and so we dropped that and we put in other kinds of more sophisticated number concepts, like being able to order from the lowest to the largest number. That ended up predicting first grade math better than any other item. So the idea was to take the literacy and the numeracy items and then create this new assessment. And we gave it to all the students in kindergarten at the beginning of the year, and we're going to be able to measure the impact of all-day kindergarten now with this assessment and with our MAP assessment that we start giving in first grade. Another use of this kind of direct assessment is to identify teachers who beat the odds. And so in Minneapolis, I did a study of kindergarten teachers that beat the odds. We found the 15 teachers in Minneapolis, some in very high poverty schools, some in medium poverty schools. They were all producing high growth. And then we went in and videotaped those teachers. I didn't put the right link for the Minneapolis. If you just Google Minneapolis teachers who beat the odds, you can get the 15 videos of these teachers. This particular link will get you into recent studies we did in Bloomington about teachers that beat the odds. And the idea is, let's celebrate the best kind of instruction that we have and then replicate it. So these teachers come and present to the school board and are able to really articulate what it is that really makes a difference for young children. This is the assessment which I'm going to gloss over. You know, one of the big things is for us in Bloomington, we needed to add something about reading a book, knowing the front of the book, print goes from left to right, etc. And then this oral comprehension, where we got on eBay and bought up all the books in the country from this 1940 book. So it's not in very many middle-class homes, and so it's not a bias for middle-class kids. And so if people are interested in a direct assessment at the beginning of kindergarten, you can talk to me. The assessment that St. Louis Park is using, the FAST, is an excellent assessment. It's been approved by the state as one of the state assessments. It's a direct assessment also. I encourage people to look at this because I don't think assessments like the work sampling that are kind of global rating scales are useful for identifying the specific deficits that students have. It covers many more standards, and it can be useful for that purpose. But if you're really trying to close the gap in literacy and numeracy for students of color, students in poverty, I think you need a direct assessment. So then we give to the teachers and to each school the shape of the distribution of student scores. The green would be students are on track to be proficient in third grade. The yellow would be partially proficient. And the reds are those that we want to intervene with tier 2 and tier 3 interventions. They also get a specific breakout of the benchmarks for alphabetic principle, phonemic awareness, and language. And then they get strengths and weaknesses compared to the district average. The main thing I wanted to talk about is a study that we did in Minneapolis right before I left, where we asked the question, are students who are in reading core classrooms less likely to be in special ed the next year? Do we save in terms of costs and time in assessment and then service of students? What we did was very similar to what was done in the Chicago study. We controlled for the pretest literacy scores, and then all the demographic factors that teachers can't control, home language, English language status, free and reduced lunch, homelessness, and if I had a tie on a student, I broke the tie with the birth date. And so we ended up with very closely matched students that were in reading core and those that weren't. And then we found out that of those kids that were in reading core, 2.3% of those students were in special ed the next year, compared to the matched sample, which was 5.7% of the students. So this is a large difference in terms of the percent. If you extrapolated this to all of Minnesota, you would get a huge savings in terms of time and money, but more importantly, we'd see more success for students staying in the mainstream and not getting that special ed label. My colleague, Bob Wadle, who used to be the Commissioner of Education, did the cost estimates, and he estimated about $8,500 total cost for serving students in special ed. And then if you think about that times the number of students that weren't in special ed, it adds up to a really big number. So that's what I wanted to talk about. I know that a lot of you are collaborating with the Reading Corps. They have a commitment to demonstrating the effectiveness of their interventions, and they're really a cool team to work with. So that's my presentation. Now we want to open it up for all of the 3 presentations to answer your questions. Thank you.